I was sitting on my back deck, watching the sunrise paint the waters of Lake Hartwell in shades of orange and pink, when I noticed a middle-aged woman with an unfortunate haircut strutting down my private dock like she owned the place. She was carrying a clipboard and wearing a neon yellow vest that screamed, "I need attention," and she was followed by two men hauling reserved parking signs. Except these weren't parking signs. They said, "Reserved boat slip." My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. This was South Carolina, my property in Anderson County specifically, and I'd built that dock with my own two hands and about $40,000 3 years ago. Every permit, every board, every galvanized bolt had been meticulously documented, because I'd learned the hard way that you don't cut corners when you're building on waterfront property. I set my coffee down and headed toward the stairs leading down to the dock. The woman was now directing the two men to hammer the signs into the wooden planks of my dock, each strike echoing across the water like a mockery of my property rights. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached, trying to keep my voice level. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" She turned to face me with the kind of smile that made my skin crawl, the fake kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you must be Mr. Jonathan Jackson. I'm Patricia Kendrick, president of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. We're implementing a new community boat slip rental program." I blinked at her, waiting for the punchline. "On my private dock?" Patricia's smile didn't waver. "According to our records, all waterfront structures within the Lakeview Estates boundaries fall under HOA jurisdiction. We sent out notices 3 weeks ago about the new rental program." "This dock is on my property," I said slowly, as if explaining basic physics to a child. "I built it myself. I have the receipts, the permits, the surveys, everything." She consulted her clipboard with exaggerated concern. "Well, that's interesting because our Architectural Review Committee approved all dock constructions in this community, and part of that approval process includes shared community use rights for any structure extending into the lake." The two men with hammers had stopped working and were watching our exchange with the kind of fascination you'd give to a car crash in progress. I recognized one of them, Dave, from the hardware store in town. He looked uncomfortable. "Dave," I said, ignoring Patricia entirely. "You remember when I bought all those pressure-treated boards from you 3 years ago, for my private dock?" Dave nodded slowly. "Yeah, Mr. Jackson, I remember." "And you remember me specifically asking about making sure everything was up to code because I wanted zero issues with anyone claiming it wasn't mine?" "I do remember that," Dave confirmed, setting down his hammer. "You were real particular about it." Patricia's smile finally cracked. "Gentlemen, please continue installing the signs. Mr. Jackson, if you have concerns, you can bring them up at the next HOA meeting on Thursday. Until this is resolved, we're moving forward with the rental program. We already have 3 residents who've paid deposits for slips on this dock." My jaw actually dropped. "You took money from people to rent out my property." "Community property," Patricia corrected, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "And yes, we've collected first and last month's rent plus a security deposit. It's all very official. The HOA is generating nearly $2,000 monthly from this dock alone." I felt heat rising up my neck. "Get off my property, now." "Mr. Jackson, there's no need for hostility. This is simply, get off my property." I pulled out my phone. "Or I'm calling the sheriff's department right now and reporting you for trespassing." Patricia's expression hardened into something ugly. "If you interfere with official HOA business, we can fine you up to $500 per day and place a lien on your property. I suggest you calm down and let us finish our work." I dialed 911 before she finished her sentence. The Anderson County Sheriff's deputy who showed up 20 minutes later was a stocky guy named Officer Reeves who'd gone to high school with my younger brother. He listened to both sides of the story with the patience of someone who'd dealt with HOA disputes before, which, judging by his weary expression when Patricia started talking, he definitely had. "Madam," Officer Reeves said after Patricia finished her explanation about community property and shared use rights, "do you have any documentation showing that this dock is considered HOA property?" Patricia produced a folder from her enormous purse and handed over several pages. "This is the architectural review approval from when the community was first established. Section 12, paragraph 4 clearly states that all permanent structures require HOA approval and become part of the community assets. Officer Reeves scanned the document, then looked at me. Mr. Jackson, do you have your property survey and building permits? In my house. Give me 5 minutes. I practically ran back to my house and into my home office, where I kept a fireproof safe with all my important documents. The property survey was right on top, along with the folder containing every receipt, every permit, every inspection report from when I'd built the dock. My hands were shaking with anger as I grabbed everything and headed back down to the water. Officer Reeves spread my survey out on the dock, weighing down the corners with rocks to keep it from blowing away in the morning breeze. He studied it carefully, comparing it to Patricia's documents. After what felt like an eternity, he straightened up. Madam, according to this property survey, which was certified by a licensed surveyor and filed with the county, this dock is entirely on Mr. Jackson's property. It extends from his land into the lake, and the HOA documents you showed me don't actually claim ownership of individual property improvements. They just require approval for construction. Patricia's face was turning an impressive shade of red. But we approved it, which means he followed the HOA rules when he built it, Officer Reeves interrupted. But that doesn't give the HOA ownership or rental rights. That's not how property law works. This is ridiculous, Patricia snapped. I'm calling our HOA attorney. You do that, I said, my confidence returning now that the law was clearly on my side. And while you're at it, you can tell those 3 people who paid deposits that they need to get their money back because nobody is renting anything on my dock. Patricia gathered her documents with sharp, angry movements. Dave, let's go. We'll return when we have our legal counsel. She turned to me with venom in her eyes. You're making a huge mistake, Mr. Jackson. The HOA has ways of dealing with uncooperative residents. Is that a threat? Officer Reeves asked, his tone shifting from patient to authoritative. It's a promise, Patricia said, then marched off toward the community clubhouse with Dave and the other worker trailing behind her like confused ducklings. After they left, Officer Reeves helped me document everything with photos and filled out an incident report. You might want to get a property attorney, he advised. HOAs can be persistent, and they've got dues money to burn on legal fees. They'll make your life difficult if you don't shut this down properly. Already planning on it, I assured him. Thanks for coming out. No problem. And Jackson, you might want to consider putting up some security cameras. Just in case. That was ominous, but I took his advice. That afternoon, I drove to the electronics store in Anderson and bought a complete security camera system. By evening, I had 4 cameras installed covering every angle of my dock, all recording to a cloud storage system that would keep footage for 30 days. If Patricia or anyone else tried anything, I'd have evidence. The next morning, I woke up to find a notice taped to my front door. It was from the Lakeview Estates HOA, informing me that I was in violation of community standards for having unapproved security equipment visible from common areas, and that I had 72 hours to remove the cameras or face daily fines of $250. I photographed the notice, then called the property attorney my brother had recommended, a shark of a lawyer named Margaret Donnelly, who specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in Greenville, about 40 minutes away, but she had a reputation for eating HOA boards for breakfast. Metro. Mr. Jackson, Margaret said when I arrived at her office that afternoon, I've reviewed the documents you emailed. This is actually a fascinating case. The HOA is clearly overstepping, but what makes this particularly interesting is that they've already collected money by fraudulently renting your property. That's not just a civil matter. That could be criminal. Criminal how? I asked, leaning forward in the leather chair across from her desk. Well, they took money from residents under false pretenses. They claimed they had the right to rent slips on your dock when they knew, or should have known, that they didn't have that right. That's potentially fraud. It's also conversion of property, meaning they're treating your property as if it's theirs for financial gain. Margaret pulled up something on her computer. How much did they collect? She said nearly $2,000 a month from my dock alone, and that 3 people had paid first and last month plus security deposits. Margaret did some quick math. So potentially $12,000 or more, depending on how much they charged per slip. That's grand larceny territory in South Carolina. She leaned back in her chair, a predatory gleam in her eyes. I think we should approach this two ways. First, we file a cease and desist letter and a civil suit seeking injunctive relief to stop them from renting your property, plus damages for any harm to your property rights. Second, we file a complaint with the solicitor's office about potential fraud. Will that work? I asked. The civil suit, absolutely. The criminal complaint depends on whether the solicitor thinks there's enough evidence to prosecute, but either way, we're going to make enough noise that your HOA board will think twice before trying something like this again. She pulled out a legal pad. Now, tell me everything from the beginning. I spent the next hour walking Margaret through every detail, from the moment I'd bought the property to Patricia's threat about the HOA having ways of dealing with uncooperative residents. Margaret took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, and by the end she was grinning like a wolf. "This is going to be fun," she said. "Give me 48 hours to draft everything. In the meantime, don't remove those cameras, don't pay any fines, and document absolutely everything. If anyone from the HOA contacts you, be polite but firm. Don't make any statements that could be construed as agreements or admissions. Just tell them your attorney is handling it." "What about the HOA meeting tomorrow night?" I asked. "Should I go?" Margaret considered this. "Actually, yes, go and record it. South Carolina is a one-party consent state, so you can legally record conversations you're part of. If they bring up your dock situation, stay calm and just say your attorney is addressing the matter. Let them dig their own graves." The next evening, I showed up at the Lakeview Estates clubhouse at 7 sharp. The meeting room was already half full with residents, and Patricia was at the front setting up her laptop for a presentation. She saw me walk in, and her expression soured immediately. I took a seat in the back row and pulled out my phone, opening a recording app and setting it on the table in front of me. Several residents noticed and gave me curious looks, but nobody said anything. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7:15, running through the usual HOA business with the enthusiasm of someone reading a phone book. Financial reports, landscaping complaints, pool maintenance schedules. It was mind-numbingly boring until we hit the new business section of the agenda. "As many of you know," Patricia began, pulling up a slide on the projection screen, "the board has been working on revenue generation initiatives to help offset rising maintenance costs. I'm pleased to announce that we've successfully implemented a boat slip rental program that will generate an estimated $15,000 annually for the community." Several residents murmured with interest. $15,000 was nothing to sneeze at for an HOA budget. "We've already secured renters for 12 slips across 4 private docks in the community," Patricia continued. "The rental fees are competitive with marina rates, but significantly more convenient for our residents who don't currently have dock access." A woman in the front row raised her hand. "Whose docks are you renting?" Patricia's smile was tight. "We're using docks on properties owned by the Hendersons, the Morgans, the Patels, and the Jacksons. All of these docks were approved by the HOA during construction, which gives us shared use rights." That was my cue. I raised my hand and stood up without waiting to be called on. "That's not accurate, and you know it." The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me, then back to Patricia, then back to me like they were watching a tennis match. "Mr. Jackson," Patricia said with forced sweetness, "if you have concerns, we can discuss them after." "No, we'll discuss them now," I interrupted. "You told me and a sheriff's deputy that the HOA was renting out slips on my dock. You admitted to collecting money from residents, but you don't have any legal right to rent my property, and you know it. My dock is on my land, built with my money, and your so-called shared use rights don't exist." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Patricia's jaw tightened. "Mr. Jackson, this is not the appropriate forum." "This is exactly the appropriate forum," I shot back. "You just told everyone here that the HOA is making money by renting out private property. What you didn't tell them is that you're doing it without permission and that you're potentially exposing the HOA to massive legal liability." A man in the third row spoke up. "Is this true, Patricia? Are you renting out private property without the owner's permission?" "Of course not," Patricia said quickly. "The Architectural Review Committee approved all of these docks, and part of that approval process—" I've spoken with an attorney, I said, cutting her off again. Architectural approval doesn't grant the HOA ownership or rental rights. What you're doing is called conversion, and it's illegal. I've already filed a cease and desist letter and a lawsuit seeking injunctive relief. Oh, and I've also filed a complaint with the solicitor's office about potential fraud, since you collected money by falsely claiming you had the right to rent my property. You could have heard a pin drop. Patricia's face had gone from red to pale in the span of about 10 seconds. That's absurd, she finally managed. The board acted in good faith based on our understanding of the HOA covenants. Did you consult with an attorney before you started collecting money? I asked. Did you verify that you actually had the legal right to rent out property that isn't owned by the HOA? Silence. Patricia looked down at her notes, then back up at me. The board felt confident in our interpretation. So that's a no, I said. You just decided on your own that you could make money off my property, and now the HOA is facing a lawsuit because of your negligence. Another resident, an older man I recognized as Gerald Morrison from 3 houses down, stood up. I want to call for an emergency vote. Patricia, I move that the HOA immediately cease all boat slip rentals until we can get proper legal advice on whether we have the right to do this. I second that, the woman in the front row said immediately. Patricia looked panicked. That's not necessary. We can table this discussion and— We have a motion and a second, Gerald said firmly. We need to vote. All in favor of immediately stopping the boat slip rental program until we get legal clarification? Hands shot up all over the room. I counted at least 20 out of the 30 or so residents present. All opposed? Only 2 hands went up, both from board members sitting at the front table with Patricia. Motion carries, Gerald said. Patricia, as of right now, the HOA is no longer renting boat slips. Contact everyone who paid deposits and return their money immediately. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This is premature. And Otto— This is necessary, Gerald interrupted. If what Mr. Jackson is saying is true, and it sounds like it is, you've put the entire HOA at legal risk. We need to fix this before it gets worse. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, with multiple residents demanding to know more about the rental program, asking about other HOA initiatives, and generally questioning Patricia's judgment. I slipped out during the confusion and headed home, feeling a grim satisfaction. The recording on my phone was going to be very useful. Margaret called me the next morning. I heard about the meeting. Word travels fast in HOA circles. They voted to stop the rental program, I told her. But Patricia looked like she wanted to kill me. Good. That means we're getting to them. I've finished drafting the lawsuit. We're asking for compensatory damages, punitive damages, attorney's fees, and an injunction preventing them from ever trying this again. We're also including a request for an audit of HOA finances to ensure they're not pulling this stunt with other properties. What's the timeline? I asked. We'll file today. They'll have 30 days to respond. Based on what happened at that meeting, I'm guessing they'll want to settle quickly before this gets more public. HOAs hate bad publicity, and if word gets out that they're illegally renting residents' private property, it'll tank property values in your community. I don't want to settle, I said. I want them to face consequences. Margaret paused. I understand the impulse, but we should talk about this strategically. If they offer a reasonable settlement that includes admitting wrongdoing, returning all money they collected, paying your legal fees, and implementing new oversight procedures, that might be a better outcome than a lengthy court battle. I'll think about it, I said, but in my gut I wanted blood. Patricia had waltzed onto my property like she owned it, threatened me with fines, and tried to profit off my hard work. A quiet settlement felt like letting her off easy. 3 days later, I got another notice from the HOA. This time, it wasn't about the cameras. It was a fine for having an unmaintained lawn and unsightly yard decorations. My lawn was immaculate, and I didn't have any decorations except for a tasteful bird bath near my front porch. I photographed everything and sent it to Margaret. She called me within the hour. They're retaliating, she said bluntly. This is textbook harassment. They're trying to bury you in fines and violations to pressure you into dropping the lawsuit. It's stupid because it just strengthens our case, but HOA boards do this all the time. What should I do? I asked. Document everything. Don't pay the fines. We'll include this in our complaint as evidence of retaliation and bad faith. The more they do this, the worse it looks for them." She paused. "Jonathan, I need to warn you. This could get uglier before it gets better. Vindictive HOA boards have been known to do some pretty aggressive things. Make sure your security cameras are working and keep recording everything." She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 5 more violation notices. My house number was allegedly too small. My mailbox was the wrong shade of black. My trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, which apparently violated some obscure covenant. Each violation came with a $250 fine and a threat of liens if I didn't comply within 10 days. I ignored them all and forwarded every single notice to Margaret, who added them to a growing file of evidence. But the harassment wasn't limited to paper. Someone, presumably from the HOA, or acting on their behalf, kept leaving passive-aggressive notes on my dock. Things like community property and HOA rules apply to everyone, printed on official letterhead and taped to my boat slip posts. The security cameras captured everything, including one memorable incident where Patricia herself walked down to my dock at 11 at night and stood there for a solid 5 minutes, just staring at my boat. She didn't do anything, didn't touch anything, but it was creepy as hell to watch the footage the next morning. "She's unhinged," I told Margaret when I sent her the video. "What kind of person does that?" "The kind who's realizing they've made a very expensive mistake and is panicking," Margaret replied. "This is actually good for us. It shows obsessive behavior and supports a harassment claim. Keep those cameras rolling." The real breakthrough came 3 weeks after I'd filed the lawsuit. Margaret called me on a Wednesday afternoon, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Jonathan, you're not going to believe this. I've been digging through the HOA's financial records as part of discovery, and it turns out your dock isn't the only place Patricia's been pulling this stunt." "What do you mean?" I asked, setting down the sandwich I'd been eating. "Econ it. I mean, she's been running a side business for the past 2 years. She's been renting out HOA amenities without board approval and pocketing the money herself. Remember how she said the boat slip program would generate $15,000 annually for the HOA? Well, I found bank records showing she set up a separate account under a shell company called Lakeview Rentals, LLC. All the boat slip rental payments were going into that account, not the HOA's. I felt my jaw drop. She was stealing from the HOA and the residents? Not just stealing, embezzling, and it gets better. I found records of her renting out the clubhouse for private events, the HOA's boat ramp access to non-residents, even the tennis courts. She's been collecting thousands of dollars and none of it was going to the HOA. She was just keeping it. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. "Conservatively? At least $80,000 over 2 years, maybe more." I've forwarded everything to the solicitor's office in the Anderson County Sheriff's Department. This isn't just a civil matter anymore, Jonathan. This is felony embezzlement. Things moved fast after that. 2 days later, I was sitting on my deck watching the lake when I saw sheriff's vehicles pull up to Patricia's house, which was on the other side of the community near the clubhouse. Through my binoculars, I watched as officers knocked on her door, then led her out in handcuffs about 20 minutes later. The community Facebook group exploded. Apparently, Patricia's arrest wasn't quiet, and multiple residents had witnessed it. Theories flew back and forth, getting wilder by the minute, until someone posted a link to the local news article. HOA President Arrested for Embezzlement, the headline read. The article detailed the charges, the amount of money involved, and mentioned that the investigation had started after a property dispute revealed financial irregularities. My phone started ringing. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to wanted details. The vice president of the HOA board, a nervous guy named Tom Fletcher, called to apologize profusely and ask if I'd be willing to meet with the board. Even Gerald Morrison stopped by my house with a bottle of whiskey and an apology. "We had no idea," Gerald said as we sat on my deck. "Patricia ran the board like her personal fiefdom. She kept most of us in the dark about the financials, said everything was handled by the management company. Turns out she'd fired the management company a year ago and just never told anyone." "How did she get away with that?" I asked, pouring us both a generous measure of whiskey. "She controlled the information flow. She was the only one with access to the bank accounts and the books. We trusted her." Gerald shook his head. We were idiots. What happens now? I asked. The board's in emergency session. We're hiring a forensic accountant to figure out exactly how much she stole, and we're cooperating fully with the criminal investigation. We're also going to need to assess all the homeowners to cover the missing money, which is going to be a nightmare. He took a long drink. And we need to settle your lawsuit. Whatever you want, Jonathan. We'll make it right. Margaret and I met with the new emergency board the following week. They'd retained their own attorney, a tired-looking woman named Rebecca Hayes, who clearly had her hands full trying to clean up Patricia's mess. Mr. Jackson, Rebecca began, on behalf of the Lakeview Estates HOA, I want to apologize for the actions of our former president. The current board has reviewed your case thoroughly, and we acknowledge that Ms. Kendrick had absolutely no right to rent slips on your private dock. We are prepared to offer a settlement. I'm listening, Margaret said, her pen poised over her legal pad. First, we'll pay all of your attorney's fees and costs. Second, we'll issue a formal written apology and acknowledgement that your dock is your private property with no HOA claims whatsoever. Third, we'll pay $25,000 in compensatory damages for the harassment and violation of your property rights. Fourth, we'll amend the HOA covenants to clarify that architectural approval doesn't grant any ownership or use rights to the HOA. And fifth, we'll implement new financial oversight procedures and board term limits to prevent this from ever happening again. Margaret looked at me. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. I want one more thing, I said. I want a permanent easement and access rights to the lake formalized in writing, beyond any HOA authority. I don't want anyone ever claiming they can control my dock access again. Rebecca conferred with Tom Fletcher and the other board members in hushed tones, then nodded. Done. We'll have the papers drawn up by the end of the week. We shook hands, and just like that, it was over. The civil side of things, anyway. Patricia's criminal case took longer to resolve. The forensic accountant's report revealed she'd actually embezzled closer to $115,000 over 2.5 years. She'd been using the money for personal expenses, including a boat she'd kept at a marina in Clemson, a timeshare in Myrtle Beach, and extensive plastic surgery. The solicitor charged her with multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and theft. She tried to argue that she'd always intended to pay the money back, that she'd just been borrowing it temporarily, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, even text messages to one of the residents she'd rented a boat slip to, discussing payment schedules and explicitly telling them not to mention it to the board. 8 months after that morning when I'd first spotted her on my dock, Patricia pleaded guilty to avoid trial. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in prison with 2 years suspended, plus restitution of the full amount she'd stolen and 5 years of probation after her release. She'd also been hit with civil judgments from the HOA and several individual residents she'd defrauded. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Patricia looked nothing like the confident, aggressive woman who'd threatened me on my own property. She was pale, drawn, and when the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she just shook her head. Ms. Kendrick, the judge said, his voice stern, you held a position of trust in your community. People relied on you to act in their best interests, and you betrayed that trust repeatedly for personal gain. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, sustained theft over years. You're fortunate that the plea agreement allows for suspended time, but I want to be clear. If you violate your probation in any way, you'll serve the full 5 years. Patricia nodded, her lawyer's hand on her shoulder. She was led away a few minutes later, and I walked out of the courthouse into bright South Carolina sunshine feeling, surprisingly, not much of anything. I'd expected satisfaction, maybe even joy, but instead, I just felt tired. Margaret met me outside. How are you feeling? Honestly, I just want to go home and forget this whole thing happened. That's fair. You've earned it. She handed me a folder. Final settlement papers. Your $25,000 check, the formal apology, and the amended easement giving you permanent, irrevocable access to your dock. Congratulations, Jonathan. You won. Life in Lakeview Estates slowly returned to normal over the following months. The HOA elected a new board with staggered terms and implemented strict financial controls. They hired a reputable management company and instituted quarterly financial audits. Property values, which had dipped when news of Patricia's arrest hit the local papers, gradually recovered. Several residents approached me to apologize for not standing up sooner, for not questioning Patricia when she'd clearly been overstepping. I didn't hold grudges. Most of them had been just as deceived as I had been, and they'd ultimately done the right thing when the truth came out. The 3 residents who'd paid deposits for boat slips on my dock got their money back from the restitution fund. One of them, a younger guy named Chris who'd just moved to the community, actually approached me at the neighborhood 4th of July party and asked if I'd ever consider actually renting out a slip now that everything was legal and above board. "How much would you charge?" he asked, beer in hand, as we stood near the community pool. I thought about it. "I've got 4 slips and I only use 2. I could probably rent the other 2 out. Call it $400 a month each, includes dock access and security cameras so nobody messes with your boat." "Deal," Chris said immediately, sticking out his hand. "I'll draw up a proper rental agreement and everything. No HOA involved whatsoever." We shook on it, and I ended up renting both extra slips to neighbors who actually needed them. The irony wasn't lost on me that Patricia's scheme had given me the idea to actually make money from my dock, but this time it was legal, proper, and on my terms. The security cameras stayed up, and I even expanded the system after someone in a neighboring community had their boat stolen. I started a small side business installing dock camera systems for other lakefront homeowners. It turned out there was a real market for it, and word of mouth spread fast. One afternoon, about a year after the whole mess had started, I was down at my dock performing maintenance, replacing some boards that had started to weather, when Gerald Morrison came walking down with a fishing rod. "Got room for one more?" he asked. "Always," I said, gesturing to the bench I'd built at the end of the dock. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the water and the occasional boat cruise past. Finally, Gerald spoke. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened with Patricia, how she fooled all of us for so long." "Yeah?" I prompted. "I think we all got lazy. We trusted her because it was easier than doing the work ourselves. Nobody wanted to deal with the boring HOA stuff, so we just let her handle everything." He cast his line out into the water. "We forgot that positions of power need oversight, that trust without verification is just asking for trouble." "Live and learn," I said, applying wood sealant to a fresh board. "Indeed." Gerald reeled in his line and cast again. "For what it's worth, Jonathan, I'm glad you fought back. A lot of people would have just paid the fines and tried to keep their heads down. You standing up probably saved the HOA from even bigger problems down the line." "I just didn't want anyone messing with my dock," I said honestly. "I worked too hard building it to let someone else profit off it." "Well, your stubbornness did us all a favor." He glanced at the camera mounted on the piling nearby. "You think she'll ever try to come back here when she gets out?" "God, I hope not," I said. "But if she does, I'll have her on camera within seconds." We both laughed, and the conversation drifted to easier topics. Fishing, the upcoming boat show in Clemson, plans for lake improvements the new HOA board was considering. Normal stuff. The kind of conversations neighbors should have been having all along instead of letting one person run roughshod over everyone's rights. That evening, I sat on my back deck watching another sunset paint the lake in brilliant colors. My boat was tied up at the slip closest to the house, gently rocking with the wake from a passing pontoon. Chris's boat was in the next slip over, and the other rented slip had a nice fishing boat that belonged to an older couple from the other side of the development. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Saw the news about the restitution payments going out. How are you holding up?" I typed back, "Good. Dock's secure, lawsuits settled, Patricia's in prison where she belongs, can't complain. You earned this peace and quiet. Enjoy it." I set my phone down and took a long drink of sweet tea, letting the sounds of the lake wash over me. Crickets chirping, water lapping against the dock pilings, the distant sound of someone's radio playing country music from across the cove. Building that dock had been one of the best decisions I'd ever made. It gave me access to the lake I loved, increased my property value, and provided endless hours of enjoyment. And now, thanks to standing up for my rights, I had ironclad legal protection, ensuring nobody could ever try to take it from me again. The legal documents Margaret had secured were filed with Anderson County and recorded in the property records. They explicitly stated that my dock, all improvements on my waterfront property, and all access rights were mine and mine alone, beyond any HOA authority. Future HOA boards couldn't touch it. Future buyers of my property would inherit those same protections. In a way, Patricia had done me a favor, though I'd never tell her that. Her attempted theft had forced me to legally bulletproof my property rights in a way I might never have bothered to do otherwise. Every piece of documentation, every permit, every receipt was now part of the court record. My ownership was unassailable. I thought about what Gerald had said earlier, about trust and verification. It was a lesson everyone in Lakeview Estates had learned the hard way. The new board published monthly financial reports online, held open meetings where residents could ask questions, and maintained strict separation between the board and the day-to-day management company. Architectural review approvals now came with clear disclaimers that approval didn't grant any HOA rights over the approved structure. They'd even created a resident committee specifically to review any proposed changes to HOA rules before the board could vote on them. It was a system designed to prevent any one person from ever wielding the kind of unchecked authority Patricia had abused. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my brother Mike calling from Charlotte. "Nate, hey, saw your Facebook post about the sunset. Living the dream down there on the lake." "You know it," I said. "How's city life treating you?" "Loud and expensive. I'm thinking about moving somewhere quieter, maybe somewhere with lake access and a brother who has extra boat slips to rent." He laughed. "Just kidding, mostly." "You know you're welcome anytime," I told him. "I've got a guest room and a spare kayak with your name on it. Might take you up on that soon. The urban grind is getting old." We talked for another 20 minutes, catching up on family news and making plans for him to visit over Labor Day weekend. After we hung up, I realized I was smiling. Life was good, the drama was behind me, my property was secure, and I had a beautiful view of one of South Carolina's best lakes right from my back deck. The dock that had caused so much trouble was now just what I'd always intended it to be. My peaceful access to the water, a place to tie up my boat and a spot to fish on lazy Sunday mornings. The fact that it was also generating some extra income through legitimate rentals was just a bonus. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the sky faded from orange to purple to deep blue, I thought about the journey from that first morning when I'd spotted Patricia strutting down my dock to now. It had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming, but it had also been necessary. Property rights matter. Community associations serve important functions, but they're not above the law. When someone oversteps, whether through ignorance or malice, pushing back isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about establishing precedent, about making sure the next person doesn't have to fight the same battle. I'd stood up for my rights, documented everything, hired good legal counsel, and seen it through to the end. Patricia had paid the price for her crimes, both civilly and criminally. The HOA had reformed its practices and settled fairly. Justice, messy and slow as it sometimes was, had prevailed. The security camera light blinked steadily from its mount on the dock post, keeping watch over my property. The motion sensors were armed, the cloud recordings were backing up automatically, and my legal documents were safely filed away. Nobody was going to mess with my dock ever again. I raised my glass of sweet tea toward the lake in a silent toast. To property rights, to standing your ground, and to the simple pleasure of watching the sun set over water you worked hard to access. The American dream wasn't dead. It just sometimes required a good lawyer and the willingness to fight for what was rightfully yours. Life in the HOA continued peacefully from there. I attended meetings occasionally, mostly to stay informed and to make sure the new board kept up the transparency standards they'd promised. I never served on the board myself, though I was asked several times. I'd done my service to the community by exposing the corruption. Let someone else handle the committee meetings and landscaping disputes. The boat slip rentals continued without incident. Chris turned out to be an excellent tenant, always paying on time and keeping his boat in pristine condition. The older couple, Bob and Ellen Martinez, became good friends. We'd sometimes fish together off the dock early in the morning, sharing coffee and swapping stories about the best spots on Lake Hartwell. About 18 months after Patricia's sentencing, I got a letter from her. It had been forwarded through the prison system and arrived in a plain envelope with a return address from the South Carolina Department of Corrections facility where she was serving her time. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully, half expecting some kind of attack or justification. Instead, it was an apology. "Mr. Jackson," it read in neat handwriting, "I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but I wanted to write to you anyway. What I did was wrong. I violated your property rights, harassed you, and tried to profit from something that wasn't mine to use. More than that, I betrayed the trust of an entire community and stole from people who believed in me. I've had a lot of time to think about my actions and the harm they caused. I'm writing to apologize, not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserve to hear it. I'm sorry for what I did to you and to Lakeview Estates. I hope you're able to enjoy your dock in peace. You earned it. Sincerely, Patricia Kendrick." I read the letter twice, then set it aside. I didn't know if the apology was genuine or just part of some prison rehabilitation program. It didn't really matter. The damage was done, the consequences had been paid, and life had moved on. I never responded to the letter, but I didn't throw it away either. I filed it with all the other documents from the case, a strange coda to a stranger chapter of my life. Years passed. The dock held up beautifully, requiring only occasional maintenance and cosmetic updates. I replaced the boat slip's cleats with upgraded stainless steel hardware. I added solar lights along the walkway for nighttime safety. I built a small covered area at the shore end where I could store life jackets and fishing gear. Every improvement was properly permitted, documented, and added to my records. I'd learned my lesson about the importance of paperwork. My file cabinet contained every receipt, every permit application, every inspection report. If anyone ever questioned my ownership again, I could bury them in documentation. But nobody did question it. The Lakeview Estates HOA ran smoothly under new management. Property values increased steadily. The community maintained its amenities without drama or embezzlement. It became the quiet, pleasant lakefront community it had always been meant to be. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I'd just paid those initial fines and removed the cameras like Patricia wanted. Would she have continued her embezzlement undetected? Would other residents have found their property rights violated? How much further would things have gone before someone finally pushed back? There was no way to know, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd stood up when it counted, and that had made all the difference. The dock remained my favorite part of the property. On summer evenings, I'd take my boat out for sunset cruises, cutting across the lake's smooth surface as the sky turned to fire. On fall mornings, I'd sit at the end with a fishing rod and a thermos of coffee, watching mist rise off the water. In winter, I'd walk down just to check on everything, ensuring the ice wasn't causing any damage. In spring, I'd power wash the boards and apply fresh sealant, preparing for another season of use. It was more than just a structure extending into Lake Hartwell. It represented something fundamental about ownership and rights and the willingness to defend what was yours. Every board, every bolt, every inch of that dock was mine because I'd built it, maintained it, and fought for it. And every time I walked down to the water, passing those posts where Patricia had tried to install her reserved boat slip signs, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not vindictiveness or bitterness about what had happened, but simple contentment that justice had been done and my rights had been upheld. The American legal system, for all its flaws and frustrations, had worked. Property law had been enforced. Criminal behavior had been punished. Civil wrongs had been remedied. It had taken time, money, and stress, but the outcome had been right. Margaret and I stayed in touch. She'd gone on to handle several more HOA cases, many of them referred by residents who'd heard about my situation. She'd become something of a specialist in property rights disputes and had even given talks at legal conferences about HOA overreach and homeowner protection. "You were my breakout case," she told me once over lunch in Greenville. "Before you, I was handling mostly boring real estate closings and boundary disputes. Your case showed me there was a real need for attorneys willing to take on HOAs. They've gotten so powerful in some communities that residents feel helpless. But they're not helpless. They just need someone willing to fight." Glad I could help launch your career as an HOA slayer, I joked. Hey, it's honest work, she said with a grin, and it pays well. Desperate homeowners are willing to invest in good representation when their rights are being trampled. The check from the settlement had more than covered her fees, which had been substantial, but worth every penny. The $25,000 in damages had essentially been free money, compensation for the stress and harassment I'd endured. I'd used part of it to upgrade my boat and put the rest into an investment account. Patricia's theft had inadvertently funded my retirement a little more comfortably. Sometimes karma worked in mysterious ways. As I write this now, 5 years after that morning when Patricia first showed up at my dock with her clipboard and her attitude, I'm sitting in my favorite chair on the back deck. The dock stretches out before me, solid and beautiful in the afternoon sun. My boat is tied up securely. Chris's boat is in its slip, and Bob and Ellen's fishing boat is in the other rental spot. The security cameras are recording faithfully, though they have never captured anything more exciting than the occasional curious raccoon. Lake Hartwell sparkles in the distance, dotted with boats enjoying the perfect spring weather. The HOA is running smoothly and transparently. My property rights are ironclad and legally bulletproof. Life is exactly as it should be. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation, and about the need for oversight and accountability in any organization. But most importantly, it taught me that you don't have to accept injustice just because someone in authority says that's how things are. Sometimes the right thing to do is plant your feet, pull out your receipts, and fight back. The law is on your side when you're in the right, even if the process is slow and frustrating. Truth and evidence matter. Justice, however delayed, is still justice. My dock stands as a testament to all of that. Every time I walk down those boards toward the water, I'm reminded that this is mine. I built it, I own it, and nobody can take it from me. Not an overreaching HOA president, not a board with delusions of authority, not anyone. The sunset tonight is particularly beautiful, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reflect off the calm lake surface. I grab a beer from the cooler, settle into my chair, and watch nature's show. My phone buzzes with an email from the HOA, the monthly newsletter with updates about community events and financial reports. Everything transparent, everything above board, everything as it should be. I delete it without reading it thoroughly. I trust the new system enough to not need to scrutinize every detail. That's growth, I suppose, being able to trust again after being burned. But I also know that my trust now comes with verification. I check the financial reports when they're posted. I attend meetings when important votes are scheduled. I stay informed and engaged, not because I'm paranoid, but because I learned that eternal vigilance is the price of living in a governed community. The HOA serves its purpose. It maintains common areas, enforces reasonable aesthetic standards, and provides amenities that increase all our property values. But it does so now with proper oversight, with checks and balances, with the understanding that its authority has limits, and that those limits matter. Patricia's attempt to steal from me had backfired spectacularly. Instead of cowing me into submission, it had turned me into exactly the kind of informed, engaged homeowner that makes HOA corruption impossible, and my fight had inspired others in the community to pay closer attention too. We had residents who actually read the financial reports now. We had people who asked questions at meetings. We had an informed, engaged community that wouldn't be taken advantage of again. Patricia's legacy wasn't the money she stole or the authority she abused. It was the vaccine she'd inadvertently administered against future corruption. The community was stronger for having survived her, and I was stronger for having fought back. As darkness settles over Lake Hartwell and the stars begin to appear, I head inside, content with another good day. Tomorrow I'll probably take the boat out early, maybe do some fishing. Definitely enjoy the beautiful property I've worked hard to maintain and protect. The dock will be there, solid and reliable, extending from my land into the water. My private dock, on my private property, with my name on every permit and my signature on every receipt. Exactly as it should be, exactly as it always was, and exactly as it will remain. Nobody messes with a man's dock, not without consequences, not without a fight, and definitely not without losing. I learned that lesson the hard way, but Patricia learned it harder. And that in the end, made all the difference.